prevailed on the need to share with the Alliance champions and members the results of the survey that took place this last summer at the wake of George Floyd's killing by a white police officer. And it was a strong reminder that systemic racism and social injustice is pervasive in our surroundings and environment. And thought it was important to gather the opinions and thoughts from the CSE community in that regard, to understand what should be actions to take and move forward. So this is again a conversation with the Alliance champions. And just as a little bit of warning, this is something that we'll be repeating later on at the Alliance annual event to inform the rest of the college. I also would like to make aware everyone that this is going to be recorded up to the point before question and answers. And without further ado, then let's start with the presentation, short presentation. And something that I like doing when we are doing conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion is to start with a short D&I moment. And this is perhaps self-explanatory. It's just basically the cover of the Chronicle of Higher Education, an article called "What College Activists Want." And it is remarkable that what we read here is basically very similar and resonates a lot with some of the emotions and thoughts and reflections that were reflected in this survey that we're gonna be discussing today. So let's take a couple more seconds to reflect on that as well. What do activists want? And what do we want in the college? Okay, thank you for that. And what we will do then is I just want to start by saying that the work that we have here is the work of the lead team, and I don't need to read everybody's names, that have contributed in one way or another to compile the information that was collected and prepare this report that you have available also in the chat, if I understand correctly. And that was already shared with our deans and the department heads as well. So, so without further ado, and we're gonna be team tagging. So I'll basically pass it now to Kara.
Hi everyone, I'm Kara Santelli. I use she, her pronouns. So just to briefly cover what we're going to be talking about today. So we will cover the results of the anti-racism survey, or at least go through some of the main points that we wanted to highlight. As Edgar said, this part will be recorded, and then we will turn the recording off and allow for Q&A session. And you can feel free to ask those questions anytime during the chat. We won't respond to them until the end, but you can also ask sort of in person or live at the end during the Q&A section. So when we sent out the poll, we initially sent it out to the Alliance, and we did ask the dean if he would consider sending it out to the entire college so that we could get a broader perspective. And so he did approve that we would send it out to the whole college. So we sent it out to everyone, and we wanted to break it down into terms of who responded. And we were just looking at the demographics, and we asked for a lot of information. If people felt comfortable sharing that information, they didn't have to share any information with us. But if we look at just simply who, in terms of the academic roles in CSE responded, the majority of responses we received were from undergraduate students. And I would say students in general, undergrad students and students. Staff and faculty made up another good portion of the respondents. And as well as postdocs. We also had a few alumni respond to our request for information, and a number of people preferred not to tell. So in total, we had about 281 respondents to this survey. We also asked people if they would be comfortable self-identifying And I'm only going to present, we're only going to look at sort of the breakdown of a few key identities. We do have information if people provided it, and, you know, looking at intersectionality of voices. But here we just wanted to show you how many respondents we had from Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And for other ethnic or cultural communities, a large portion of those were international, people who identify as being international. We had a large response from white or allies, and a number of people chose not to self-identify.
So we should go back one slide, right? Or yeah, so the survey,
Oops, sorry, Edgar, sorry. Sorry, there
no
you are.
problem. Yeah, so the idea of the survey as well was because we are all experiencing survey fatigue, and compile that with the only way to communicate and have these meetings now is via Zoom. We felt that the survey has to be very short and just go directly to the point. So the question was, being aware that at that point in time, after the killing of George Floyd, we were basically experiencing individual trauma. Many people were. We were experiencing as well social and community trauma and intergenerational trauma. It was important to keep it very, very simple and generic. So we had open-ended questions. The first one was about the concerns, about what we were experiencing as members of for people of the BIPOC community who are members of CSE. We asked for suggestions of what the Alliance should be doing, what the administration and departments must do in order to take action and to address racism and racial bias, and any other feedback in general. And the idea of this was to, first of all, report to you, the Alliance, to report to the deans and the CSE community, incorporate those responses into future strategic planning for the Alliance goals and mission, and also for encouragement and requests from the leadership in the college to take action as well. And lastly, to share these other resources with entities like of OED or the graduate school or COGS or any other organizations that are also very attentive and try to keep a sense of what's happening in our environment about systemic racism and other forms of oppression that may exist. So, so we did that, and then what we basically, we then used a coding system to try to understand what these concerns were. And this is the first part of the survey. And what we have here is the number of responses that were that fall under the different categories. Clearly, the one that was more prevalent at that point in time was racism, discrimination, microaggression, bias, and all of that in a way were clumped together because sometimes it's very difficult to really fine tune what is racism, what is microaggression, what is discrimination. So all of them were combined together. We also acknowledged that some respondents had more than one concern. So they were counted as such, as more than one concern. The second concern in the number of responses was on the representation of BIPOC in the leadership, in the administration, in the staff, and even in the student bodies. Campus safety, systemic barriers, lack of education or awareness, financial issues, and other forms of oppression were also mentioned as responses. And the reason why we thought it was important to mention this is because even though the number of respondents were low, we need to take seriously everyone's concerns. Each one of these could be important, particularly, for instance, situations like campus safety and systemic barriers that may not have been the first and most important concern at that point in time are clearly issues that are pervasive and very important to address short-term and long-term in our college. I also highlighted here this rectangle in green that represent that we are not all on the same boat, that we basically represent a spectrum of opinions about systemic racism and about where we are in our journey towards addressing these systemic issues. So I'm not gonna say anything else about that, just want to respectfully agree that we have differences in opinion in that regard. And if we go to the next slide, please, and I'll pass it on to you, Kara.
Okay, thank you, Edgar. And one thing we did do is look at the responses of the BIPOC community and those from other identities. And we did note that in general, there was strong agreement between the feedback that we were receiving between those different identities. So when we looked at, what were the asks? What were people asking in terms of what they wanted to see the Alliance doing versus what they wanted to see CSE leadership and departments doing? If you look at the top two recommendation types, so this is where the coding fell into place, where we had different recommendations towards education and training and community building. Those two recommendation types were highly recommended by a lot of people for both the Alliance and for our leadership. And as Edgar pointed out, just because something may not have been an ask or a recommendation as often, it still doesn't mean it's of lesser importance. Certainly things like financial investments or restructuring CSE and reforming policies will still be just as important. And even though those recommendations may not have been voiced as often, for example, as education and training. So we'll go a little bit more into some of these topics. We'll break them out for you through the remainder of the talk, but some of them were specific to faculty and staff and what our responsibilities are here. And some were specific to students and postdocs. And as Edgar noted before, not everyone, there's a continuum of responses, and a number of people did ask us to either stop or decrease DEI efforts in CSE. That was their ask. So, I already kind of mentioned education and training as being one of the top recommendations. And we'll break these out even further. We'll go through each of these and community building. But I think with education and training, community building, and then we kind of agreed that a lot of the other asks fell into these systemic barriers. What are the barriers to equity, to inclusion in the college? And so we're going to go through, Edgar and I will spend some time going through these major asks. But one of the things that I think really stood out in all of these things, and you'll see this as being pervasive throughout here, is that, there was a strong ask for accountability, being held responsible for carrying out these actions or these requests. And that accountability you'll see as a term that repeats itself throughout here as we go further into depth. So we'll break these down now for you in terms of, I'll start with education and training. So the ask in general was probably one of the most common asks was to have mandatory training. So most people ask for mandatory training around DEI topics related to microaggressions, implicit bias, bystander intervention for responding to specifically bias and discrimination. This is one of the opportunities where we had a recommendation for the college to continue to support and encourage training. There's a lot of debate about whether or not training should actually be mandatory. So what we recommended is, highly encouraged, well-supported, meaning financially supported, socially supported training. The other big topic related to education and training was actually in the classroom. So many people asked that DEI actually become a prominent and persistent topic, even within CSE classes. They had many recommendations for instructors related to especially things like using teaching practices, stop using teaching practices that could disadvantage Black, Indigenous, or other students of color. Those types of practices that, if stopped or in changing your teaching practices could actually benefit many, many students in the classroom. And so there were also recommendations within administration. And this is where you see accountability come into play. Some of this was related to the teaching evaluations, right? The SRTs, the student reviews of teaching, and incorporating actual questions about inclusion, about classroom climate into these evaluations, and then holding instructors and departments accountable for some of these, this feedback and for implementing changes in the classroom. There were also asks, and you'll see a similar ask later on related to reporting the bias and microaggressions. Students wanted more ways and better ways of giving feedback, specifically to report bias or microaggressions, and then recognizing that they wanted accountability on that feedback. So Edgar, I'll pass this on to you at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. I think at home it's safe to unmute myself right now. A few minutes ago, it wasn't that case. So the second general theme that we noticed in the responses from the survey was community building. There are three categories that fall under this general definition: nourish an inclusive community, recruit, mentor, retain, and promote BIPOC in the college, and outreach to K-12 schools and communities. And these were grouped under community building because they represent different important phases for having a community in which everyone feels included and develops a sense of belonging. So particularly in that regard, let's begin with the first one: nourish an inclusive community. There was a sense that there is already some of that already going in the college in terms of events like this one, for instance, that we can hold conversations, but they also wanted to have more dialogues, extend that opportunity to have more and more, not only in special events, but also in seminars, in other forums, and let's be courageous to use words like racism, because racism does exist, and social justice. And also to include this type of conversations in classrooms, in orientations, in departmental events, in searches, etc. They also, the respondents also were asking to encourage everyone to participate. If we basically look at who is in this event right now, we could say, I haven't seen who is in this event right now, but usually it's about the same number of people that are committed allies or BIPOC like myself. So it is important to engage more and more members of the community to create this community. Vocal recognition of BIPOC and vital contributions and accomplishments is extremely important, as these are critical to build the community as well. And finally, reward for commitment for every effort of inclusivity and improving the climate, as opposed to just basically saying, oh yeah, that's nice. No, there has to be recognition about that. The respondents were also asking the college and the departments to be more effective at recruiting, mentoring, retaining, and promoting BIPOC in the college. And that refers not only to students, but also as well to faculty, postdocs, and staff. And also to consider that sometimes it's necessary to have additional resources or practices that are conducive to really be inclusive, like mentoring, or financial was an aspect that was also already mentioned. There are some situations in which a fee will be a barrier for some people, or the pay will not be sufficient for something that needs to be done. So there was a financial consideration for the well-being of those that are part of the college. And finally, the pathways that we basically use to invite members of, well, basically beginning with first-year students to join the community. So how can we actually be effective at outreaching K-12 schools and communities so that we can actually be more aware of the trends in demographics and also be prepared for that as well. And also be aware of the realities that exist in these communities. Sometimes we live in isolation at our college, and that connection with the communities is something that was identified as critical. So let's go to the next category, please. The third category is systemic barriers. And even though, as you saw in the initial response, there were very few respondents that mentioned that, only 3%, it was clear that this is an endemic situation that we need to address. We cannot just forget. The 3 topics were make CSE accountable and transparent, change CSE structure and the leadership culture, enable better reporting of bias, discrimination, and racism. And the key words here were that there is always a sense that even though we have leadership that is trying to be more accountable and transparent, that is not sufficient. That it's necessary to have more data transparency, that there is data that we don't get to see, and the actions are not necessarily as clearly communicated and timely communicated as one would like. The structure of CSE and the leadership culture, it's important to consider that we need to have more persons or more people that are in the leadership with the capacity to effect change. And one clear recommendation was that the community wants to have a D&I director or a dean or a similar position that could basically enable that change. Recognize and reward individuals that are promoting DEI, and make DEI part of our culture and in our evaluations, in our plans, and in other activities that are important for the functioning of the college. And lastly, but not least, that reporting bias and discrimination and racism, even though there are systems in place to do it at the university level, the trust for those systems is not there. The respondents were asking for improved and confidential reporting systems, and basically make these reporting systems accountable, demonstrate that there are actions and consequences for incidents that are associated with racism, discrimination, bias, microaggressions, etc. So that basically is, in a nutshell, what we capture from the respondents. And I also would like to mention that these responses basically echo the same type of responses that were sent for the Alliance. But today we are just focusing on those that were directed towards the CSE leaders and the departments as well. And if you would like to peruse or to read in more detail what's going on, we have been putting the link in the chat of the full report. Now, so I'm going to summarize what we basically have described so far. First, the survey respondents, the majority of them are asking for action. There are concerns with the BIPOC communities, and regardless of what the racial or ethnic background of the respondents, the voice is unified. People want action. The Alliance is also joining the CSE community in asking for actions from the administration and the departments. We are asking for the college to include education and training on DEI topics as part of our culture, as part of our academic efforts and professional aspirations, such as those that we consider in our research environments. We urge the college to be also agents of change. We need to be together to build community where belonging is a priority and respectful communications are a commonplace. And we realize that this is not easy. We realize that there are many restraints, financial restraints, organizational restraints, but we encourage the college to accept with courage this challenge, because only by doing that, we can disband systemic barriers within the college. And lastly, we will need to reflect on where do we want to be as a college? Do we want to be the college that is going to be known for staying behind and not addressing an important need of our times that has been there for a long time? Or do we want to be known as a leader that was basically that accepted the challenge early and promoted change? So I'm gonna stop here. And Kara, do we have anything else to add besides that?
No, I think we just wanted to thank everyone. I mean, we want to thank you for, you know, being champions of diversity and inclusivity. We want to thank you for providing your feedback through the survey, for being here today to talk about the results of the survey. Yeah, I think Edgar, you summed up the report nicely, and you know, we're happy to take questions. We can't respond to, you know, how the administration is going to respond, but I do want to assure you that in our meetings with the administration, they've been very, very receptive to this report. They wanted this report. They wanted to know, and they cared very much about this, the words that were in this report, about the perspectives that everyone had shared. And so, you know, the administration has been very supportive of all of our efforts. And, you know, I think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, where we go in the future.